We're taking anywhere from 30 deer, 35 deer a year, and we're still seeing browsing levels at the low level, so I'm happy.
Right here.
Yes, are deer territorial? In other words, are they hanging around in the area, are they just passing through? Are the 50 deer you see all be the same, or are they different?
Well, they have a home range, which they use, and the home range size will depend on what resources are there. I mean, the more resources that are there, the smaller home range can be. You know, we had a tagging operation many years ago where we found that some of the adult females, their home range was like 100 acres, 150 acres in size, because they could find the food, water, cover, everything they needed in a very small area. They're not territorial, no.
So if you had, say, a 100-acre plot that everybody agrees has high, what do those numbers look like? Is it 50, is it 20, is it 100?
In terms of high deer densities,
Yeah.
well, people would say anything over, depends on who you talk to and what it is you're trying to accomplish. Some people would tell you that more than 20 deer per square mile is too many deer to see the number of wildflowers you want to see in your forest understory. It all depends on the mosaic of the landscape in general. There's been a lot of work done in Pennsylvania where they claim that 20 deer per square mile should be your absolute limit for regeneration and for species diversity. But those are in unbroken, huge forest tracts. In this area here, if you've seen some of the pictures that Charlie showed where you've got a very broken up landscape, you know, deer use all those different components. So they take, you know, an old field habitat will take a lot of pressure off your forest, especially during an open winter. So some winters, you find very little browsing in the forest because the deer were able to move throughout the entire landscape. And they were feeding in these old field habitats instead.
There's a question here.
I hope Mr. Fersen or Mr. Bontecou or Mr. Winchcombe could enlighten me about the varied reports from different wildlife biologists with regard to the role of coyotes in controlling deer population. Is it the case that coyotes cannot or do not want to bring down a full-grown deer, or is it the case that two or three of them together working as a pack can do so, because that would have significant policy implications for controlling deer population?
We have actually seen, I think a lot depends on the weather conditions in a typical winter. As I mentioned, this year, when you have a deep snowpack, and then as that settles and gets a mild crust on it, the coyotes can move on top and the deer break through. At that time, I'm not sure that they can take down a healthy, very healthy animal in the peak of its 4 or 5 year old deer. However, they will indeed be able to take down older animals, yearlings, and which all affect the population. I was merely commenting on the fact that in general it seemed that there was a concern about deer numbers and coyotes being not being able to help out each other in numbers. So in other words, any kind of control at all. I do think they are controlling, especially when you consider that coyotes eat an awful lot of voles and mice, and when that's covered, they need to look elsewhere for food. So they're going to look at the larger animals, which they then can catch. We've actually seen a bobcat catch a yearling deer. And again, because it can travel on the snow, we watched it happen. We know it can happen. How common it is, I wouldn't be able to tell you, but I know it does happen. So there is some control. Also, I might address that as to exclosure, we don't have exclosures, but we do a timbering. We have a lot of this property is in the 480A program, forestry program, and mandated that we do cuts at specified intervals. So in harvesting those trees, rather than doing a clear cut, we will do a selected cut, but try to fell the saw logs or saw timber on top of each other and leave the tops high, which again, the crowns of those seedlings have to get up through those tree limbs, and henceforth when the tops rot down, they are above the level that the deer can browse on. And that is another way of naturally trying to let some of that understory get a little bit of a grip.
Over here.
Thoughts on selective farming of white-tailed deer for large racks of horns and the potential for wasting disease?
Do you want to farm deer?
No.
Well, there's a huge industry of white-tailed deer farming in this country, and it's being more and more tightly regulated as each year goes by because of chronic wasting disease and other issues. New York State, I think, is pretty much would rather not have any deer farms within its borders. The DEC does not control deer farm permits. It's the Department of Agriculture does that here in this state. It's probably a really bad idea. I have no respect for trophy hunting or for people who want to propagate a gene pool to develop large antlers so some guy can go into a fenced area and shoot them. That makes no sense to me whatsoever. It's not deer management. It's a commercial enterprise. So it really has no place in deer management.
Yes, over here.
As areas move a little bit from more rural to more suburban, and we have a history of hunting in families, which might be the most obvious way to bring up younger hunters, what kind of programs are available to introduce young people to deer hunting where their parents might not have grown up?
Well, I'll tell you what I know. There's not a lot in that regard. The DEC tried at one point to establish a mentoring program where after signing legal papers and whatnot, a person could turn their daughter or their son over to a responsible individual and start learning the craft of deer hunting. It never really took off, to my knowledge. It's pretty much, doesn't really exist, to be honest with you. It's something that we need, because right now most hunters get involved with hunting either through a family member, an uncle or a grandfather or a neighbor or something like that. And as those folks are giving up the hunt, that doesn't happen anymore. So that's one big gap that somebody needs to be addressing.
Actually, there's not specific to deer hunting, but I know that we, like at Sandanona, one of the things we do have wing shooting schools. Now this is shotgun as opposed to rifle, obviously. But there are a number of youth that get involved in those or brought to those schools, correct, Peggy? We have, yes.
But in New York State, you're not allowed to shoot if you're not 12 years or older.
Right, but still, so one of the ways that that there are ways to do this in terms of our commercial, in particular like this one, this wing shooting thing, where you get them involved in the act of shooting, the act of gun safety, and start to teach them the hunting ethic. And then if they determine that they want to hunt deer, then they're more well equipped, obviously, as they grow older to begin to hunt deer as opposed to other species. So there are some commercial things out there, not deer specific, but where you can, there are shooting schools where you can send them to learn how to do those things.
Can I just mention, Paul, also, there's an organization called the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Some people compare it to the NRA, but there's a completely different organization. The National Shooting Sports Foundation, you read their mission statement, it really is to perpetuate our youth, to get them into hunting and shooting and safety. And they do a lot of first shots, things where, they invite people to bring their young kids or to teach their kids. So I would check out their website, National Shooting Sports Foundation. They're a great outlet for that. Thank you.
No, well. Tim's numbers were similar, 2,000 acres, 50 deer, I can do that division. And if you had, for example, 100-acre property, I mean, I wish not too many 2,000 or 3,000 acres. It would be a fairly small number of deer then, 100 acres, which is pretty big. It would be one or two. Does the calculus remain the same, or does it change for smaller properties?
Well, unless your property is fenced. If it was fenced property, then you can go ahead and you can manipulate that population, whatever number you want. But in an open landscape where deer come and go as they please, I'm from the school where you can't kill enough deer. To be honest with you, because those around you will come. All right. I mean, deer do move around to a certain extent. Under hunting pressure, deer will move off your property into on a hunted land, for instance, and they will come back after hunting season is closed. So you have these refugias around you usually. And we fought that for years and years and years. I mean, we were just barely treading water. We killed as many deer as we could, and next year we just killed just as many. That's because we had large tracts around us that didn't hunt. But as soon as other neighbors started to hunt, we actually started making some serious inroads. So chances are you're always going to have deer. So take as many as you can.
The lawn here in Cary at dusk during deer season is particularly good unplanned refugia. Let's see, question over there.
Oh, yes, but two questions. What's the good one? As far as conservation easements are concerned, is there a map that shows all the conservation easements in the state? Online someplace?
Did you say a map that shows all the conservation easements in New York State?
Yeah, no matter who holds it.
I don't know if that has actually been assembled. We have an easement map for Dutchess County, and I think a lot of the different organizations have maps of their own sort of service areas, but I don't know if we've done one for New York State.
Do you have to know if this one follows the conference?
My guess is probably not, because in Ulster County there are a lot of sort of more regional organizations and not a kind of a county-wide organization, so whether they pull their information together. Sometimes as conservation organizations we don't just widely distribute those maps, mainly because the question I mentioned before about public access, people get confused about conservation easements on private land and land that's open to the public. And so we want to make sure that people who have access to those maps understand that this is private land. It's not, accessible to the public unless they have the landowner's permission.
It'd be really useful for planning boards to know where to.
We actually we actually provide that information to all the towns in Dutchess County. So I can certainly, if you talk to me later, I can put you in touch with the organizations in Ulster to see.
I have another question about human contraception. I know human contraception can be delivered by a single guard, so it's no more effort to guard it here than to shoot it here. And it's effective for 4 years. And the only reason it's not being used in New York State is because DC doesn't permit it. The serum does not bioaccumulate in the flesh of the animal, so there's no residual effect. The animals later hunted, shot, and killed, and eaten by other animals or by people. So what's the problem with human contraception?
Well, I don't know what product you're talking about, but every product I know about it requires a booster shot. So you need to identify the individuals.
It's a product, I forgot the name right now. It's developed by J. Kirkpatrick, and so that's used fairly often. He's a professor. He's also hunting, incidentally. He's actually finds it just as challenging to guard against the truth. He's a hunter.
Yeah, well, I'm not familiar with that product, so I really can't answer that question. I mean, the products that are
It's a gold shot for 4 years.
yeah, well, that's news to me.
Over here. Yes.
I'm in northwest Connecticut, and in certain areas of the far north of Connecticut, they're seeing significant declines in deer population. The state DEP has assessed that the disease is due primarily to the recovery of black bear population, and resulting in fallen predation, increasing black bears as well
elsewhere in the county are still overrun?
Well, there's no question that bears and coyotes both take a lot of fawns. I mean, what a lot is remains to be, quantified. But yeah, even as the populations in Dutchess County continue to grow in terms of black bear populations, I would expect to see more fawn predation. I find fawn predation in the spring from coyotes all the time. Coyotes have been here for a long time. The numbers seem to be increasing, but the deer populations aren't going down. So it could be something else up there where you are.
The sites that they're being sites they're monitoring, they're having a 68% predation by bears and bobcat, no coyotes.
On fawns.
Yeah.
Well, that would certainly eat into the population at some point.
2 years of studies in the line, it's still not happening.
Well, I think I view that as not a bad thing.
No, it's a great, yeah.
Yes, sir, in the middle there.
I'd just like to ask Becky a question. In the conservation activities revolve around deed restrictions, limiting the use of properties henceforth specifically farming, or deed restriction pricing property henceforth as strictly at a farm use price.
So you're talking about an easement that restricts the farm so that it reduces it just to being used as a farm?
An easement or a restriction that would only allow the property henceforth to be farmed, period.
That's a subject we're actually grappling with. A lot of the conservation easements we deal with mostly will restrict the use of a property to farming uses, but that could be owned by essentially anybody. It doesn't have to be owned by a farmer. And so in other states, they have what's called an option to purchase at ag value, which then reduces the property to, it puts an additional restriction that that farm can only be sold to a farmer who qualifies under certain criteria. In New York State, we're grappling with that because you can't have an OPAV program in New York. It has to be something different. But there are organizations who have looked at this legally and are coming up with, the right tool to use. But the big question is the money, because you have to then, that's an extra sum. It's already expensive to buy development rights in Dutchess County. We're talking maybe $6,000 to $8,000 an acre to buy development rights on a farm. If you add in the extra amount to make sure that always stays a farm, you're talking about another $2,000 to $4,000 on top of that protection. So it's something we're looking at. It's going to be expensive, but time will tell.
I know in the state of Vermont, they put on such restrictions for the last 300 farms in the park.
Yeah, and they're a real model we've actually looked at.
There's a question way in the back, and then to go against the wall
Yeah.
there, yeah.
I have a question for all of you, including Becky. When you allow hunting, do you require any work of some kind by the hunter to kind of offset the privilege that you're giving to them? Building fences, doing these exclosures, Ray mentioned studies, counting deer, but any concrete work. In particular, I would think it would be useful for the land trust.
Well, we don't own any property, so we leave the choice of whether a landowner wants to open up their property to hunting to the individual landowner, so that would really be up to them. And I'm not sure how other organizations who actually hold land as preserve and open it up to hunting, whether they, look to the hunter to help them with that or not.
So it's a little bit of a mixed deal. On Raleigh Farms, they do have to have 20 hours of participation in some manner. Usually it's helping throw hay bales, which is very high on everyone's list. And second only to picking rock, which is also a favorite. But on the lands that the Tamarack owns, why indeed it's a part of a program that we offer to some of the members. We also, in following up on young folks, we do try to provide, we let them shoot pellet guns and BB guns, which is legal when they're old enough to actually hold up the the gun. They cannot, as Peggy pointed out, legally shoot a rifle or a shotgun until 12. And then instantaneously they can go out with an older person and hunt. Well, I don't know how they ever get any experience before that, but there you go. So we do have a number of people that will go into the woods with young people. A family member, there may be 3 or 4 kids in a family. A father can only sit with one. So indeed, we'll have other people that can go and sit in blinds with other people to help to get them started. It's not a real big program, doesn't have a great outreach, but it does help in some regard.
Just to answer, I had a dairy farm for a number of years, and so I was a private landowner, and it was in Vermont, and I had people wanting to hunt. I posted my land not to keep them out, but I posted it with permission only because I simply wanted to know who was there. And I developed a relationship with a number of people that I was comfortable with, who I knew and trusted, and those were the people that I allowed to hunt my property, and was happy to have them. And I would get some pretty good jam and jelly from them when I was out.
Well, in New York State, you got to be very careful whether or not you require some kind of service or monetary reimbursement to allow for hunting access. Because the minute you do that, you put yourself into an entirely different liability category. Right now, if you allow access for hunting and a hunter gets hurt, you're protected by a particular law, the General Obligations Law. But as soon as you start asking and demanding some kind of a service in return, now you've basically waived that. Now your liability goes out the window.
Question here in the front.
To what extent has it been lobbying with the DEC to increase the number of
I don't think there's been a great deal of lobbying. I know that we have been approached from time to time from wildlife officers to participate in some discussions. You probably have as well. Typically, they come out and listen carefully to what you have to say, and then pay absolutely no attention whatsoever to what's been discussed. So I don't know if that actually ever figures into any of their plans or not. They do try to control, I think, that some of the census from reports about animals that are taken do factor into how many doe permits they issue. In my opinion, it's not nearly enough, nor is it on a very well planned out strategy that they offer them. It's basically a lottery system, and it's I don't understand that. I know that New Jersey at one point had a program where you had to take a doe first. You took that to a station. They then gave you a tag to shoot a buck. That greatly helped control their population.
This doesn't have to do with female deer, but I was at a meeting at the DEC recently, and I have no idea where this is all coming from, but I know Ray said that there seems to be a decline in hunters. But the DEC was really talking about, and this was coming from the governor, that they are thinking about, trying to expand areas for hunters to get out on properties. And so they're even talking about, incentives for landowners to open up their land for hunters. So there must be a demand somewhere, I'm not sure where it's coming from the hunting side, to have access to more land.
We're here in the corner, and maybe we'll begin to wrap up here.
I wanted to follow up on Peter's question about the easement availability of the information. There's 2 new web-based tools that are, I think they're fairly new, I've only learned about them the last year. One is an iPad, which is a New York, what does it stand for? Something like Public Areas Database, Protected Areas Database. And then there's also the National Conservation Easement Database, and they're both available online, and they're the result of public-private partnerships. And I mean, if Becky, if you don't know about it, then it makes you wonder where they're getting their easement data, if local land trusts aren't involved yet, but I think it's a growing trend to try to make that information available.
Well, and again, actually, I'm sure we've been asked for our information on those, again, it's that whole question of, ensuring the information gets out there in the right way.
Exactly, so
People
our
aren't
website
trespassing
is
on private properties.
that's part of it. But my question is, so with encouraging landowners to do things like exclosures and try to help promote regeneration, do you know if any of the farm bill programs like the WIP, like the Wildlife Habitat Incentive Program, can they help fund or subsidize some of the landowner activities that are preventing deer browse or anything else? Because I mean, it's an expensive endeavor, that's why I'm asking.
Not to my knowledge, do they? I know that they participate in cost sharing with roads, with all manner of stabilizing logging roads, stuff like that, water courses. But I don't know about. I think they will help with stream bank stabilization. I have not heard about exclosures. Have you? No?
So thanks to everybody for coming today. I hope this has been as educational for you as it has been for me. We've heard a bunch of different perspectives that I think would be useful to everybody that owns even a small piece of land. And the Cary Institute is very pleased to put this program on. And I'm probably supposed to say something else because
If you all could fill out your evaluation form, we really appreciate it. We need those on the side table outside. And if you're interested in getting credit for attending today's session, I will be at that table on Friday.
and this is Lori Quillen, who deserves a round of applause for her.